Thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank David Friegstad and congratulate him on this wonderful occasion. Thank Arup Zucchi, who's done a wonderful job with globalization. And then I'd also like to thank Neil Wang for this opportunity to come here and talk to you. You know, when I've been to Shanghai before, but every time I come, it's so different. So I tell my friends, you know, you want to see the future, come to Shanghai. And I'm pleased to be here. So let me begin by talking about maybe not the conventional wisdom. We all talk about globalization. David mentioned we're going through this dramatic transformation. But in fact, over the last 40 years, we have seen globalization. Companies have been preparing for globalization. Unfortunately, globalization is not the only thing that's happening. We are also seeing a fragmenting world. And I think that's very important to keep in mind as you pursue your globalization strategy. And what I'm going to be talking about is some of my own work on what we call new economic statecraft and why this is something you need to think about. Because of new economic statecraft, companies need to craft both market strategies and, as Arup mentioned, non-market strategies. And I will explain what that means and why Frost Sullivan can help you do that. Finally, we'll talk about the tactics that you might be to implement, what your strategies are, which is central to being a successful company. So let's think about how the world was that we hoped it would be. And it was like this for 30 or 40 years. We had deals being made, people traveling around the world. Everything was going quite smoothly. And the theory behind this is a well-known theory called commercial peace theory. When I teach executives and I say, which of many theories do you like the most? They love commercial peace theory. Because commercial peace theory says, the more you interact, the more you do business, the better place the world will be. I'm not against that. I wish it were completely true. And there is evidence. We see more channels to settle disputes among government, business, and people. We see that the problem of cutting ties is that it's very detrimental to the global economy. We see the example of the European Union, which was created to prevent war between France and Germany. And on that score, it has been extremely successful because European Union has, by and large, been a very peaceful zone after hundreds of years of war. But we also see the negotiation of various bilateral and multilateral trade agreements, which have been good in some cases, but in some cases have been detrimental. So what was the vision? The vision is the world is flat. This became a very popular book, that the world is flat, technology is connecting the world, everyone will have equal opportunity, and we will see the rise of nations outside of the industrialized West. That's true. We've seen the rise of China. We've seen the rise of India, the rise of Mexico and Brazil, and many other countries. But the argument that Thomas Friedman made was only a technological argument. But the technological argument needs to be merged together with the political economic structure in which we operated. And that is under threat. We see a rise of protectionism in the global economy, very critical for firms trying to operate globally. We see what we call a spaghetti or a noodle bowl of trade accords. Since I'm in China, we all know that Marco Polo took spaghetti from China, so you should use the term noodle bowl, not spaghetti bowl. But this kind of description of what's going on in the world economy suggests that pure globalization is having a problem. We see the rise of what we call mega free trade agreements. Agreements among the ASEAN countries, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. We see the effort to create a transatlantic trade and investment partnership. And we see the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a subset of APEC members, which has now become CPTPP, Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. The problem is, however, that we see that whereas we have a lot of economic interdependence, it is also possible for countries to manipulate economic interdependence. What we see is the politicization of people, goods, and data. We see that the World Trade Organization, which provided the fundamental basis for globalization, is increasingly under threat. China joined the WTO in 2001 and successfully integrated into global markets. We see states prioritizing national security implications. Often they say it's national security, but it's often just simple protectionism. So we have lots of intervention in the market. So this term, this phenomenon, is something I have called with one of my former students, who's now a professor at Berkeley, new economic statecraft. The use of economic tools, whether it's industrial policy, trade restrictions, or investment regulations, to achieve geopolitical strategic objectives. Now, how do countries do this? They engage in measures at the border, behind the border, and beyond the border. And we can see some examples of trade policy using tariffs, which was mentioned in the previous presentation, quotas, taxing exports, customs regulations. On the investment side, we see rules about investment. We have this American rule, FIRMA, Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act, which also regulates foreign investment. What does this mean for companies? They cannot simply enter any market without understanding the stakeholders, the governments that are involved, that are using these measures in some cases to restrict access to their market. We see behind the board measures, subsidies, regulation, health standards, safety standards, which I believe in many of these standards, but sometimes they are used simply to protect firms that don't want to compete. We see governments using actions to encourage or restrict foreign investment in their markets. And finally, we see these beyond the border examples, trade promotion or investment promotion in other countries, regulations by international organizations, and even efforts to regulate AI by the EU. This is a difficult problem for the EU, of course, because the EU is far behind the leaders in AI, which are China and the United States, and so regulating something that is evolving so quickly is very difficult, and the EU has seen that problem. So what do we see? We see this journal I edit called Business and Politics, where we need to analyze both the market and non-market environment. And you're all familiar with Porter, Michael Porter's strategy, 5 forces. Every business school student learns this model, and it's very important. It was a useful model to understand the firm's organizational and market environment. However, it's also a limited model. It does not take into account all actors. It does not take into account courts, media, government policy, other stakeholders. And as David Friedstad said, we need to be able to address, as CEOs, you need to think about all of your stakeholders. And that is very important for success. So as the manager, as the CEO, and even if you're not CEO, you need to think about both market strategy and non-market strategy. And the market environments determines the significance of non-market issues. If we are developing AI, it is not simply something that is only for commercial use and that no one else will care about. Many people are very upset with AI all over the world, not just in China and the United States, but everywhere, because they are concerned that there will be job losses, that there will be a change in how companies operate, and that will be very detrimental. It could be very positive, but it could be detrimental. Non-market strategy shapes business opportunities. The creation of the EU affected German competitiveness. The creation of RCEP, with China at the center of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the world's largest mega free trade agreement, will affect how Chinese companies and Thai companies and Japanese companies do business in this new free trade agreement. So how should we think about these issues? I won't go into great detail, but let me just talk about what David Barron at Stanford Business School has called the need for an integrated strategy. Companies need to pursue a market strategy, which you're all familiar with, but they also need to understand non-market strategy. How can I work with stakeholders in different countries? How can I be successful? So it's not just about one model fits all. I may have, as a Chinese company, a global strategy, but that global strategy needs to be tailored for individual markets. And American companies have seen that as well. If they just pursue one global strategy, you cannot think that the Chinese market is the same as the Korean market or the German market. You must tailor your strategy. And you need to implement this through various tactics. So I'll spend just another few minutes on this issue. This kind of framework, building on David Barron, says the first thing you need to know, what is the issue? What is concerning people? What is concerning your stakeholders? The second is, who are the critical actors on that issue? Who will be concerned? As you know, TikTok was in the United States. It became a very complicated situation. Or Huawei in the United States. Or American companies going into Europe. All of this has become complicated. Then we need to know what interests do the actors have. We need to know where will they interact. Is it going to be social media or formal institutions? We need to know what information these actors have. And finally, we need to know what assets. So just as you analyze the market, you need to analyze the non-market environment. I won't go through all of these, but clearly, explosion of new technology and innovation is leading to such kinds of backlash. Whether it's Google Map, and there's a famous case, I know you think I'm making this up, but when Google Maps was becoming popular, there's a woman in Oakland, California, where I live, who complained that her cat was visible in the window. And she said, my cat has a right to privacy. And Google started changing its policies, its market strategy, to wipe out pictures of cats and people. So companies think, and many engineers think that, oh, this is such a great product, but they do not look at the societal and political implications of their product, whether it's thinking about child labor or pollution, etc., or changing institutions. Actors, many kinds of actors are involved. It's not just about the market, the competitors, and the customers. It's about the regulators, the governments, the NGOs, and you need to understand on any one issue, who are the critical actors. You need to understand what are the interests. What do actors want? Are they united? Are they aligned? This also helps you understand what your strategy should be. We need to know what the arena are. Is it informal? Is it formal? Is it on the web? How does this interaction take place? In a world of social media, many of the interactions take place on the web, not in formal institutions. We need to think about what information you have. People always think in terms of money, but information is very important. Understanding markets is very important, and understanding the non-market environment, scientific evidence, and the use of evidence is very critical. Finally, we need to know what assets you have. It's important to have money to manage your company, but you also need to have good relations with decision makers. You have to know who has authority to control issues, and you have to know who you can build your alliances with. It is very common for American technology companies who compete with each other like crazy to actually collaborate with each other when it comes to different kinds of regulation. Finally, let me just close by talking about these list of tactics that you can use and that Frost and Sullivan can help you think about. What of these tactics can be used to improve your non-market position? How can you develop a strategy that will be successful both in the market and the non-market, because that is the only way to profitability in the current fragmenting world. So I'm going to leave you with a few takeaways. One is that politics and thinking about stakeholders is omnipresent, particularly in a fragmenting world. Executives need to understand the difference between what is the market environment and what is the non-market environment. And finally, executives need to take an integrated, coherent, and strategic approach that links both arenas. Don't simply think about the market, think about the non-market, and that's how you can be successful in an increasingly fragmented world. Thank you very much.